If everyone could take their seats so we can get started, I'd appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. They didn't clap. Good morning. The Committee on the Elections of Subcommittee on Elections of the Committee on House Administration will come to order. I would like to thank the members of the subcommittee and my colleagues from the House who are here with us today, as well as our witnesses and all those in attendance for being here today. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks, and that written statements be made part of the record. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that Chairman Thompson be invited to sit on the dais for the subcommittee hearing today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. My name is Marcia Fudge, and I am the subcommittee chair. I want to thank my colleagues, our witnesses, and the people of North and South Dakota, and the tribal leaders of several communities for joining us here today. We have had the responsibility and the honor of traveling this nation in the past few months, hearing from those on the ground about the reality of how elections are run, and gathering accounts of those who have experienced challenges and outright discrimination as they seek to exercise their constitutional right to vote. The Voting Rights Act was necessary because of this country's long and painful history of not extending the right to vote to all of we the people. The Native American community has suffered alongside other minority groups in this denial of the franchise. When the 14th Amendment granted citizenship rights to Black Americans in 1868, the government specifically interpreted the amendment to exclude Native Americans on reservations, and it wasn't until 1924 that Native Americans won full citizenship under the Indian Citizenship Act. Native American advocates fought state by state to ensure their right to vote. Only in 1962 did Native Americans become enfranchised in every state. Thus, current efforts at voter suppression and disenfranchisement of Native American communities fall within a continuum of extreme marginalization of this particular population. For that reason, there is no better place to be to hear the story of Native American voting access than here at Standing Rock, where plain efforts are at suppressing the Native American vote persist in law to this day. North Dakota adopted a voter ID law even after the Deputy Secretary of State warned it would disproportionately burden the Native American community. South Dakota has had more litigation over voting rights violations than any other state in Indian country. We've heard stories of voters being forced to vote in a chicken coop. That is not what the Voting Rights Act envisioned, and it simply has no place in our democracy. We are here to listen and to do something about what we hear. With that in mind, we are pleased to have with us today the very people who can tell this story firsthand: Native American advocates and litigators, tribal leaders and legislators, who are right in the middle of the fight for justice and who are willing to honor us with their presence and stories today. I thank you for your tireless efforts on behalf of every voter in the Native American community and toward a robust democracy for all. I look forward to your testimony. I would now yield for an opening statement to my colleague and friend, the Ranking Member, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to be here. My first time, and as many of us who are coming from outside of North Dakota and South Dakota, our first time to the Dakotas. So it's an honor for me to be here at Standing Rock, and as somebody who had the honor of recognizing the first ever Native American woman, our colleague Deb Howland, when she chaired House proceedings just a few months ago. This is really, truly an honor for me to be able to be surrounded by such history. And as a member of the House Administration Committee, this is a great opportunity to be here to bring Washington to you, rather than expecting everybody else to go to Washington. You know, since the creation of the Committee on House Administration, oversight of federal elections quickly became one of our chief tasks. Throughout the CHA's existence, the committee has worked across the aisle to create significant and necessary election policy that has widely impacted this nation, including legislation to eliminate the poll tax, legislation to create easier access to members of the military and their families when they're voting overseas, and also the Help America Vote Act, a landmark piece of legislation that took significant steps to remedy the problems seen in the 2000 presidential election. The Subcommittee on Elections is designed to serve as an extension of the CHA to enhance oversight capabilities of federal elections. While the subcommittee has not always been a formal part of the Committee on House Administration, the work on election administration has always remained a top priority. Since the subcommittee's recent reinstatement, I've been told by my good friend, Chairwoman Fudge, that the current intention of the subcommittee is to investigate voting rights issues. The Voting Rights Act was enacted in 1965 for the purpose of removing racial-based restrictions on voting. The VRA historically has been a bipartisan effort, first enacted under a Republican president and a Republican Congress. This legislation has primarily remained under the jurisdiction of the House Judiciary Committee. Our committee, however, has an obligation to review how elections are administered and recognize problems Congress can solve, which I hope we're able to learn more about here today. One of the reasons we're here today was the Supreme Court's 2013 decision in Shelby County v. Holder, which revolves around Section 4 and Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. In that opinion, Chief Justice Roberts opens his majority opinion by stating that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 employed extraordinary measures to address extraordinary problems. Ultimately, the court did not weigh in on whether there remains an extraordinary problem. The court did, however, hold that what at one time made sense has lost its relevance and noted that nearly 50 years later, things have changed dramatically. If there is evidence of intentional, widespread voter discrimination, we should take steps to remedy that in a bipartisan manner. Additionally, we should do our due diligence to review the facts and the numbers carefully and also hear from all stakeholders. What are the voter registration trends? What are the turnout trends? It is essential that Congress make the most well-informed decisions possible. Voting is a fundamental right to American citizens, and protecting that right is a responsibility I take very seriously as the ranking member of this committee. Today, I'm here, along with my colleagues and friends, to listen to all of the witnesses who have graciously agreed to participate in this field hearing. I look forward to hearing what you have to share with the subcommittee. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I'd also like to recognize the other two members of Congress who are sitting here with us on the panel. First is Mr. G.K. Butterfield of North Carolina, who is a member of the House Administration Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee. And lastly, Chairman Benny Thompson, who is the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee for the U.S. Congress. With that, we will introduce our panelists. Again, you each will have 5 minutes. When you begin, you'll see the lights come on. Green light means start. Yellow light means you have 1 minute left. Red light means please try to wrap up. First, we are pleased to recognize Charles Walker, Judicial Committee Chairman, Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. Myra Pearson, Chairwoman, Spirit Lake Nation. Alicia LeCount, did I say it right? Okay. General Counsel, Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. And Mr. Roger White Owl, CEO, Mandan Hizdasa, and tell me, Arikara Nation. Thank you so much. We will begin with you, Mr. Walker. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Charles Walker, and I serve as chairman of the Judicial Committee of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. It is our pleasure to host you for this field hearing. Thank you for being here. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe is a federally recognized tribe located in both North and South Dakota. We have approximately 15,975 members, 8,637 of whom live on a reservation. And of those living on a reservation, roughly 5,868 are 18 years or older. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe has a strive for respectful relations with the state governments of North and South Dakota. However, tensions have been pretty high, especially high in the recent history. For example, North Dakota prosecuted hundreds of Dakota Access Pipeline protesters. The last trial didn't finish until this February, and the North Dakota governor signed a bill on April 9th that will make it harder to obtain public records regarding critical infrastructure projects, which presumably targeted at further protecting pipeline construction projects. South Dakota legislature also just passed a bill that could hold pipeline protesters liable for 3 times the cost of extraordinary law enforcement costs, presumably, once again, in preparation of protests over the pending Keystone XL pipeline. The governor was the one who introduced the legislation, and it took only 3 days. For both chambers of the state legislator to pass it, even if the states claim that these laws were passed with a neutral lens. They suggest heavy anti-Indian sentiment, especially regarding protests or other forms of political participation. The state recent voter IDs laws carry a similar anti-Indian undertone. North Dakota has had voter ID laws in place since 2004, but for years the law still permitted individuals to vote if the poll worker could vouch for the identity of a qualified voter or the voter signed an affidavit swearing under penalty or perjury that he or she was qualified to vote. These exceptions were especially useful on the Standing Rock Reservation, where tribal members serve as poll workers and can vouch for almost every person within the community. This all changed in 2013. Democrat Heidi Heitkamp won a Senate seat in 2012 by less than 3,000 votes, or roughly 1% of the state population. We believe Standing Rock votes had a large impact on that election, with Native American votes putting her over the top. In response, in 2013, the legislature immediately imposed an ID requirement that required a residential address. Unfortunately, these ID and residential address requirements severely impacted voters on Standing Rock Reservation. Many people on Standing Rock do not have an ID, simply not necessary for everyday life. Most people know each other, and many people do not have a vehicle. Truth is, ID costs money that people simply do not have. Family poverty rate in Sioux County, North Dakota alone is 35.9%. The nearest driver's license site is about 40 miles away. The average person is not going to travel that distance just to get an ID they do not need. And a tribal ID is still going to cost money. Typically, unless you are elderly, we charge for an ID since we need funding in order to cover the cost of staff time and printing the ID. Additionally, the U.S. Postal Service does not always operate in the rural areas of the reservation. Many members use and share P.O. boxes instead of having mail delivered straight to their homes. And even if the UPS did operate within a reservation, many of the homes are not marked with house numbers. Many streets lack signage, and even if the state government has an address listed for a particular residence, that might not have been ever communicated to the homeowners. And to make matters worse, the state uses multiple addressing systems, so some government officials might have one address listed while another has a different address. Simply put, it is a massive hurdle for many on Standing Rock Reservation to figure out their actual residential address. We also have a significant portion of the population that is moving from home to home because they do not have housing of their own, which means that even though they remain within the reservation, they do not have a consistent address. This makes the residential address requirement especially burdensome. The North Dakota legislator has said that these voter IDs are necessary to prevent voter fraud, but this is simply not a problem on Standing Rock Reservation. Tribal members serve as poll workers, so they recognize just about all the members in the community. Further, the fail-safe mechanisms in the latest iteration of the voter ID law do not actually address the problems that Indian voters face. If the problem is simply a lack of legitimate residential address, they likely do not have a utility bill or some other document addressed to that address. Bottom line, members of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe feel that North Dakota voter ID law was meant to target them and dissuade them from exercising their constitutional right to vote. It was hurtful to our members to be excluded this way, and our community remains outraged. This election cycle, the tribe responded by expending valuable resources to try and make sure our members were not disenfranchised. We normally charge a $5 fee to print new IDs for any tribal member under the age of 60. We waived this fee leading up to the election. We issued 807 new tribal IDs between October 15, 2018 and November 6, 2018. We could have charged a fee to print 486 of these, which means we lost nearly $2,500 in income and spent almost $500 to print all these IDs. Previously, and by comparison, Tribal Enrollment Office averages only 47 IDs a month. I guess we remain concerned with the state's voter ID law. We joined the Spirit Lake Tribe in their lawsuit against the state, and we will continue to fight against the repressive effects of the law. Once again, thank you for being here today and hearing our concerns. This concludes my comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Ms. Pearson.
Good morning, Chairman Fudge and Ranking Member Davis. Thank you for having me here today. And I'd also like to thank the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe for allowing me to come here and speak today. I'm Myra Pearson. I'm chairwoman for the Spirit Lake Tribe. And Spirit Lake is a federally recognized tribe located in the center of North Dakota with an enrolled membership of 7,547 members as of February 13, 2019. There are approximately 3,659 members currently living on the reservation land situated within North Dakota, and about 108 members live within 20 miles of the reservation. Approximately 2,146 members of Spirit Lake living on the reservation are 18 years or older. Adjacent to the reservation are approximately 66 members who are 18 years of age or older. Many of our members struggle with housing instability, unemployment, and poverty. In 2015, a survey of 285 people living on the Spirit Lake Reservation indicated that 38% of people have an individual income of under $5,000, and 73% have an income of under $20,000 a year. 47.8% of the residents live below the poverty level as compared to the national average of 13.8%. 41% reported that they had been homeless at some point in their lives. The Chandeska Chikana College estimated in September 2014 that there are around 300 homeless people residing on or around the reservation, but also noted that an estimate might be conservative due to the many members not signing up for housing assistance. Given these realities and the fact that many parts of the reservation have not been thoroughly addressed, many members do not have an ID since they do not need one to live their lives and they cost money. If the members have IDs at all, they hold tribal IDs that list their address as a PO box if they have one. There are many streets on the reservation that are not labeled, and there are many houses which lack numbers. And even if the county 911 coordinator was assigned a residential address to someone's home, many are never notified of this address. Mail services do not extend to certain parts of the reservation. For example, in Fort Totten, all residents receive their mail through a PO box. There is no PO or no postal service delivery to residents in this area, so they must rely on a PO box to conduct their affairs. Spirit Lake became concerned that its members would not have IDs required to comply with the current voter ID law and decided to expand its resources to help its members obtain acceptable IDs. In the weeks leading up to November 2018 election, members and staff of Spirit Lake Tribal Government spent several hours a day working to address these serious issues for its members. In order to ensure that its members had valid IDs, the tribe chose to extend hours at the Tribal Enrollment Office. Between October 22nd and November 8th, 2018, the Enrollment Office was open from 8 a.m. until as late as 7 p.m., depending on need. Robin Smith, the director for the enrollment department, had to work through her lunch break on a regular basis in order to ensure the needs were met. Ms. Smith worked a total of 21.25 hours of overtime between this time frame at a rate of $37.50 per hour, which cost the tribe an additional $796.88. During this time frame, the tribe also waived the cost of the tribal IDs for many of the members, which ordinarily would cost $11. The ID fee would normally have gone toward covering the cost of issuing the ID, including supplies, equipment, ink, and paying the staff. In order to meet the needs of the members of the additional requests for IDs, the tribe purchased a new printer worth $2,655 and $1,105 worth of supplies such as the ink and the cards themselves. The tribe issued a total of 665 ID cards between October 22nd and November 8th. Normally, the tribe issues 30 ID cards per month. Due to the fee waiver, the tribe lost $7,315 in income during this time. I'm going to share a personal story with you. My time is running out here, but my testimony pretty much echoes what Mr. Walker has just stated previously. But I did experience, this past summer I had gone to apply for some central air. And so while I was filling my application and then the company that was going to finance my central air unit told me he couldn't do it. And he said, it's not because of your credit rating or anything. It's because we can't locate you on the map. He said, as far as I'm concerned, you could live in Canada, he said, and not live where you say you're living. I gave him a physical address and everything, and he wouldn't accept it. So I couldn't get my central air through his company. But at the same time, I also had a phone delivered to my home, and they couldn't find my address. But I was paying the bill. And so then about 7 months later, I asked about about the bill and why I was paying for something I didn't have. Well, they finally sent it, but it sat in the warehouse all that time, you know, at the FedEx office, because they didn't have a physical address on me. And I've had that physical address, and I've lived in that same location for the past 22 years. But I still do not exist as far as the GPS and, you know, everything that goes along with that. So I hope, you know, today you can understand the difficulties that we have here, not only on our reservations, but, you know, as a Native American, you know, we have many issues that we have to face and we have to go up against. And again, I want to thank you for allowing me this extra time.
Thank you very much. Ms. LeCount.
Thank you, Chair. Marcia Fudge and representatives. Thank you, Chair, Marcia Fudge and representatives for coming to North Dakota for this field hearing. I'm Alicia LeCount, the General Counsel to the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians and a tribal member. I apologize on behalf of Chairman Jamie S. Azure. Presently, Chairman Azure attends a government finance meeting on behalf of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. The Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians reside in north central North Dakota on a 6 by 12 mile reservation. We have upwards of 36,000 members with 19,000 living on or near the reservation. Based upon the Bureau of Indian Affairs labor statistics, our present unemployment rate hovers at 69.75%. Of course, with high unemployment, poverty ensues. Such great poverty and its reality escapes many U.S. citizens' comprehension. Because of this high poverty rate, the community's access remains limited. Limited because of those living below poverty do not have vehicles, driver's license, or other means of public transportation to various government service providers. So the recent enactment of the North Dakota bills, which places requirements on the original citizens of this land, tend to diminish, discourage, and repress the Turtle Mountain tribal citizens' right to vote and access to poll. As you are all aware, the various states of the Union administer the federal elections. So in order to vote for the president or any other federal delegations to U.S. Congress, my tribal community must vote in a state election. This is not our preference. When the U.S. Supreme Court's decision issued in mid-October upheld the law that required physical addresses, the youth demanded action. The youth came to the tribe and asked, "What are you going to do to prevent disenfranchisement of our people?" The tribal government enacted law to enable voters to receive free tribal identification cards. Understand that the fee of $15 is not exorbitantly high, but $15 is milk and bread for a week for a poor family. And as many of the congressional delegation may be aware, that we are not a wealthy tribe. We have scraped and scrimped and survived these past 200 years. Every time I come before one of these hearings, I start crying. With this understanding, the government waived fees for tribal identifications to meet the requirements to allow our members to vote. Now our only tribal identifications meet the same standards as the state of North Dakota's, the same weight, dimensions, and appearance on 2,400 new identification cards. Still, with this mandate for free identification cards, things were not easy. The Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa's Indian Reservation's use of addresses and street names commenced recently. Uniform addressing and numbering of residences only occurred within the last 10 years. Still, we implement that law with street naming and house numbering. Street signs do not exist. Most residences lack a house number. Myself, growing up in a small town rather than on a reservation proper, if I may, placed my number on my residence when I moved to Belcourt. Now, most private residences still lack a house number or a fire number. Many of our public housing numbers have house numbers, but those house numbers all start with the same number, and separate unit number applies to each individual. So such system confuses our first responders because the 911 system fails to enumerate the unit numbers. Furthermore, to get the 2,400 IDs issued, we experienced numerous technical difficulties. The first day of free tribal IDs, our ID machine melted down in the actual physical IDs because it became too hot. As a result, we sought assistance through any means necessary. Social media, news outlets, the Moccasin Telegraph. We received an outpouring of support and donation to further our cause. The Turtle Mountain Tribal College created a helpline which the students volunteered manning. We purchased new machines to produce IDs and set them up at numerous locations throughout the community. Our dedicated motor vehicle department staff worked 14-hour days for the 2 weeks through the date of the election. We held Get Out the Vote rallies. While we do not comment upon the intent of the law, but its a practical implication acted to disenfranchise the people of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. We met the challenge and improved our voter turnout from the 2016 president election by 42%. But please understand, this took a great amount of financial and time resources. The tribes organized like never before. The tribe's youth led the charge. So much so, the students led a march from the high school to the poll on election day in a snowstorm with wind chills. But luckily, most of that was downhill. The subcommittee clearly sees tribes and tribal members as vulnerable populations with limited resources, access to education, healthy food, and opportunity, so that we as a tribe and as a people can vote. Access to polls to include our few voices will forever be a priority for our tribe, and we ask the subcommittee consider our population in its work. The 2018 federal election is now part of our cultural history, and the youth movements provided hope and expectation for a better tomorrow for the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Mr. White.
Well, good morning. Humpy Shishna Dashkashnish, Didoshate, Jeed. Hello and greetings in all three languages of the Mandan, Hirata, and MHA Nation. Good morning, Chairwoman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Roger Whitehall. I work for Chairman Mark Fox as the Chief Executive Officer of the Mandan, Hirata, and MHA Nation. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today. Our Fort Berthold Indian Reservation is in western North Dakota along the Missouri River. We reserved these lands through their series of treaties and agreements with the United States, beginning with the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty. Ever since the Treaty of Fort Laramie, there have been difficulties and great challenges in government relationship with the United States. Today, voting and election administration is one of them. I am a citizen of the Mandan, Hirata, and MHA Nation, and I voted in tribal elections. I am also a citizen of the United States, and I proudly served the United States Marine Corps to provide defense for these lands. But as a tribal member living on our reservation, I do not have the same ability to vote as other United States citizens. This is unfair and must be corrected. We have a treaty and trust relationship with the United States, but this is not upheld in the area of elections. Instead, we are required to vote according to state laws. This is wrong. States have no business passing laws and determining polling places for Indian tribes. We do not have a treaty and trust relationship with the state of North Dakota. When the state runs elections and comes up with voting laws, they don't have to ensure that tribal members can cast their vote. The state does not work with us to make these voting accessible for our members. This is wrong and suppresses the tribal vote. The MHA Nation asks that the subcommittee raise this to the highest levels of House leadership. The federal government, not the states, should work with tribes to come up with the voting rules that will work on our reservations. The federal government should also work with us to determine how many polling places are needed on our reservation, and the federal government should provide funding to support these polling places. The state should have no part in our right to vote in elections. In fact, North Dakota is working hard to keep tribal members from casting a vote. Recent elections here have been very close for a few thousand votes. If a tribal member can't cast their vote, candidates they support, that support our issues, can't get elected. As you know, in 2017, North Dakota passed a law that was designed to reduce the tribal vote. The state law requires IDs to have the current residential street address. This goes beyond the typical voter registration requirements. Our rural reservations and housing systems were not set up that way. Many of our members use a P.O. box for their addresses. We recently began developing community streets and housings with residential addresses, but our reservation is mostly rural. The state knew this, and they used it to suppress tribal voters. The MHA Nation has more than 16,000 members. Almost 6,000 of our members are voting age and live on or near the reservation. Remember, elections in North Dakota get decided by a few thousand votes. Most of our members have IDs that list a P.O. box as their address. The MHA Nation had to step in to take action to make sure that tribal members' votes would be counted. As fast as we could begin issuing new tribal IDs and create street addresses for our members and their homes. Our enrollment office had limited staff and resources to do this work. In about a month and a half, they issued 456 new IDs with new addresses. We did not get any support from the state of North Dakota or a federal trustee to do this work. Some tribal members had to drive for hours to get a new ID. Every day, especially during lunch breaks, there were long lines of people waiting to receive new IDs. I am sure many people were unable to get the new ID. Even with all this work, about 1/3 of our members still do not have tribal IDs. In addition, many of our addresses we use to make these IDs may not be accurate for the next election. Many tribal members listed a family home or a home where they're currently staying. This is not voter fraud. This is a result of an unworkable state law being applied to our reservation. We also do not have enough polling places. Two important polling places on our Forebears segment and Mandaree segments were recently closed. Forebears is one of the major economic hubs in our capital. With only a couple polling places, many tribal members had to drive 80 to 100 miles round trip to cast their vote. This is unacceptable. The federal government must provide resources and open staff for polling places on Indian reservations. The MHA Nation has a government-to-government relationship with the United States. Indian tribes contributed to vast resources to the founding of the United States. Our voters must not be denied the ability to vote by state laws. It is time for the federal government to fulfill its treaty and trust responsibilities to ensure that tribal members can vote. We need ID requirements that work for us, and we need enough polling places so that our votes can be counted. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today. Thank you to the Standing Rock Nation for hosting this hearing. And thank you for the committee for hosting this hearing. I am available to answer any questions.
I thank you all so much for your testimony. Now the committee will ask questions. We will each have 5 minutes as well. But for my time, I would prefer to close, so I'm going to yield to Mr. Butterfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you to the chairwoman for convening this very important hearing today, and thank you for your leadership. For those of you who don't know, Chairwoman Fudge has scheduled 7 of these hearings all across the country, from Brownsville, Texas to North Dakota. And so I believe this is number 3 of 7. And so thank all of you and to the future panels for your participation today. I really came today to listen. As members of Congress, we do quite well in speaking and talking, but I really came today to listen. And the 4 of you have given a very valuable testimony today, and I'm going to take what you have said back to Washington. It's our responsibility as members of Congress to protect the right to vote, not just for African Americans or Native Americans or Hispanic Americans, but protect the right to vote for every American. And what I've heard here today seems to suggest to me that there is a deliberate effort in both Dakotas to suppress a portion of the vote in these states, and I'm very, very concerned about it. I'm a little naive when it comes to some things about Indian reservations, and so you're going to need to help me just a little bit with this. Are you able, does the law give you the right to participate in local elections and elections for the state legislature and the like, Mr. Owl? Do you participate in state and local elections?
Madam Chairwoman and rest of the committee, yes, we do. It's that we are allowed to vote. Yes, it's not that we're being totally denied it, but sometimes a systematic portion of it within the local elections in and of itself, specifically for us at Fort Berthold, is that our voting district was kind of in a very unique position, and this is something with the state elections. Unfortunately, we had a legislator resign, and it wasn't made public in a timely manner for us to hold another special election. And so the majority party was able to appoint a person to do that representation of the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in District 4 in North Dakota.
So the Native Americans, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just put it in context, is that they have a northern and a southern part in our district, in District 4, which we can get that information to you as soon as we can. And the southern portion of it encompasses the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, and the northern portion of it encompasses non-Indian communities. And it's gerrymandered in a way that is a little suppressive to us in that capacity. And in this instance, the chairperson of the Republican Party did not allow enough public time or public announcement to hold a special election, and they were able just to appoint somebody from their own party.
Let me ask you this. Are there any Native Americans who serve in the state legislature in North Dakota?
In North Dakota, we have 2 legislators, yes.
Out of how many?
Wow. I would have to get that number and get back to you on that one. I don't know offhand.
Count, do you know right off the top of your head the size of the state legislature in North Dakota?
From recent votes I've seen on legislation that's been relevant to us, there's at least 45.
And so Native Americans do run for the state legislature from time to time. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are they often elected or often not elected?
I would have to say it depends on the demographics of where you're at, the proximity to that. Turtle Mountains has had a very consistent Native American voice and vote that has been able to ensure that happens. Fort Berthold, unfortunately, as I said, it's been put into a district that isn't very favorable to have so. We haven't had a Native American legislator from Fort Berthold serve in our state legislature.
Mr. Walker, do you have redrawing of the districts every 10 years like most states?
Yes, the gerrymandering, which was mentioned, you take a look at the district here from which Standing Rock or Sioux County, it goes into Morton County, which is technically, you take a look at it realistically, it's a Republican stronghold. And if you take a look at it from a factual point of view, you have the demographics doesn't represent the true representation of the people within that district, because you have tribal members living here who still have a distinct culture, language, world point of view, which doesn't align with either party, I'd say. And
do you have input in the drawing of the lines?
Not that I know of.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you. Ranking Member Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our panelists. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Appreciated hearing your concerns, and as somebody who understands close elections, I get the fact that you want everybody to be able to cast a ballot. You want to make sure that no one is disenfranchised. And coming from Illinois, where the tables are turned when it comes to partisan majorities in our state, I'd love for those of you who are concerned with the gerrymandering process to please come down to Illinois when we start redrawing our lines here in a few years, because many of the same concerns that you may have with the legislature here in North Dakota, we certainly have with our legislators in my home state too. I want to ask you, Mr. Whiteout, you mentioned voter turnout And, you know, we share the same goal that we want every registered voter who's eligible to cast a vote to be able to do so. In and around the counties that you serve, was the turnout in 2018, a midterm election, higher, lower than 2014, the last midterm?
I would have to definitely, Madam Chairwoman and Representative Rodney, I couldn't have the direct numbers on it for you right now at this point in time, and I definitely can get back to you with those.
What counties in North Dakota are in your tribal area?
We have 6 counties that we encompass on a 1 million acre Indian reservation in northwest central North Dakota. And so as we're looking at it, it's one of those things when we talk about proximity and the accessibility to voting, it is definitely an issue where we have a reservoir in the middle of our reservation created by the Pick-Sloan Act that also has a bit of an impediment where we have parts of a county
Okay,
that are across
I
one side
understand.
of the lake.
I'm losing some time here, and I got to get to some other witnesses. I appreciate the geography issue, but in the end, I'm looking at county turnout, and it looks like it was substantially higher in 2018 midterm election than it was in 2014. I'm looking at Sioux County that had a higher turnout than even the presidential election in the 2018 midterm. So it looked like a lot of the issues that a lot of the outreach was successful in getting people to the polls, even in a midterm election, higher than presidential election levels. That's good news. So we're working in the right direction. Mr. Walker, you're the only tribe that actually cuts into 2 states?
Yes.
Okay. So the rest of you are working consistently just with the North Carolina leader, or North Dakota leaders, correct? So I'll focus on more North Dakota. North Dakota is the only state in the nation that has no voter registration process, right?
That is correct.
Okay. We all have voter registration. We all have to go register beforehand, provide who we are, street addresses, and many of my rural communities that I serve have similar issues where they go get their mail at a P.O. box, but they also have to then use their 911 address. It seems to me that with a non-registration state, is it easier to then go vote on election day, or is it more difficult?
When you're talking about, Madam Chairwoman and Representative, when you're talking about that, there's kind of not the same type of issues that we deal with when you talk about registration in that capacity, because we have proximity issues and distances that we have.
You guys have
That's part of the
proximity
reason.
and distance issues, yes. But what about
That also
registration versus a non-registration state?
Process portion of it it's okay. That portion of it is.
So you don't want to become a voter registration state?
No, I think North Dakota has some of the most progressive laws in that capacity. However, it's due to the simple fact is that you have such a rural state, and the accessibility portion of it does become an issue for any
And that's
voter.
something you've addressed with your state leaders for sure.
We've attempted to, yes.
Okay, all right. Mr. Walker, Madam Chair, Ms. LeCount, any comments on
I guess
turnout?
I would say the voter turnout wouldn't have been as high as it has been had our tribe and our allies and our had pushed for that to happen.
Right,
you
right.
know,
It's
so-
voter
so-
participation, action.
We could say
encourage.
that, but it's all up to interpretation, because had the tribes had stepped back, let's see what the North Dakota voter law takes place, let's look at it as an experiment, those numbers would have been twice, if not 60% lower. And the impact intended by the state would have taken place. So the question that you're asking to state that, I know your leading question is to state that, yes, there was higher voter turnout, but that was because of the collective actions of all the people involved to combat the intended voter laws, whatever the intent. You have to take a look at the realistic, the truth, the facts. We have to be objective here.
Right, so
that's
that's what I'm trying to get at here with the numbers. I mean, the numbers are that the turnout was higher. So what you're telling me is the intention, that you're talking about was not achieved?
What I'm
Because of higher
talking,
turnout.
what I'm talking about is that there's a law, you put something into place and you keep referencing the higher turnouts. Those higher turnouts wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a collective effort.
Are you going to continue those collective efforts?
Oh, yes.
Good, good. I
Have
think
to.
that's,
We're up against something that, without, I guess, to a point, we have to do what we have to do. We've been doing this for generations upon generations, even before the establishment of the United States of America, the corporate government. We have been in here for time immemorial, and we will continue to survive. We will do what we have to do.
this was, I'll leave it at this. I know my time is out, and Madam Chair has been very generous to me, but I would remind you that the turnout was even substantially higher than the 2010 midterm, where this law wasn't in place. So keep up the efforts, keep continuing to get people engaged. We want everyone who has an opportunity to vote to be able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson.
Thank you very much. Let me thank the witnesses. My accent will probably give me away. I'm from Mississippi, so pardon my accent. Just for the record, in Mississippi, my state, you can register to vote with a post office box. You don't need a physical address as of this day. I'm registered like everybody else in my little community of 500 people. We don't have door-to-door delivery. So you get your mail at a post office box. You get your jury summons at a post office box. You don't get it as a physical address because you have to have a post office box in my community. The other thing is to each of the witnesses, by requiring a physical address for registration, is it your testimony to this committee that caused a financial burden on individuals, or what burden did it cause by the implementation of this requirement to have a physical address? And I'll start with Mr. Walker, and we'll go.
Well, the financial burden has to fall somewhere. You take a look at that. We have had the Standing Rock Sioux tribe not waived the price or the $5 fee for the tribal IDs. You take a look in the testimony, 807 were issued. That in itself is substantial to take a look at, not only supplies, the time, and also the effort from our partners and allies who have actually the transportation. And I like Mr. Whitehall's testimony also that reflects the facts that there is a lot of area we have to travel just to see your basic needs, such as a doctor, go to the store, do those different types of things. I commute 26 miles one day every day just to come here and conduct business. And if you're in a financial hardship time, you know, that's $40 guaranteed that's going to have to come out of pocket. And if you're living on a fixed income, just like our relative has said here, that's bread and milk for a week. You know, are you going to eat or are you going to vote? It comes down to those liberally. We talk about all these different Maslow's law, all these different things. Your needs come before everything else, and that's the basis of it. When you have to choose between having supper for your children or grandchildren, our multi-generational living units, you're going to choose to take care of your family first. So in a way, the cultural or the lack of cultural understanding and knowledge, the gap is so wide that at times I feel like I'm literally going into a different world if we go to the state legislators or state leaders, because there is a lack of understanding, or maybe even a lack of wanting to understand the people here on Standing Rock. So with that being said, there is a cost. Who has to eat that cost? If the capital's not there, nobody's going to eat that cost and nobody's going to vote. So yes, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe did waive some of that, and ultimately Standing Rock Sioux Tribe is who had to take care of that cost in order so that, and I'll say this for the record too, is that the reason we have done that is because as elected officials here in this body, we also took an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And those guaranteed so-called rights, we have to uphold those also. So we had to guarantee that our membership had the right to vote whenever those types of things. And there's a lot of different angles and everything that we can interpret and come into that. With that being said, but in regards to the situation we're talking about with North Dakota's voting ID law, that in itself is something that we had to really take a look at, and it didn't catch us by surprise either because it was something we knew was coming.
I would assume that the other three witnesses agree with Mr. Walker's statement. Chief Pearson, Chair Pearson.
Excuse me, yes, I would have to agree there. And as far as like the, the money that was, or the funds that were used for this, what I didn't include in my testimony either was the transportation costs. And I know there was people that, we asked if they can haul the voters to the sites because a lot of people lack transportation. So that's something that wasn't included in here either. But, like Mr. Walker stated, the tribe has to eat this cost. But I guess it was well worth it because we did get a good turnout. And we do cover four counties there that, I can speak, I can speak for that Native Americans are a part of.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, and thank you all. And I'm just going to try to wrap up as we prepare for our next panel. Let me just first thank you for your patriotism, for wanting to participate in this democracy. I thank you for that. And just because your results are better than some might have expected, due to your strength and your fortitude, it still doesn't make it right. So I thank you for doing what you can to be good Americans. I also want to apologize for what seems to be the neglect of the federal government to stand up to its promise that it made to you and all of those on reservations in this country. As you look at the amount of poverty, as you look at the amount of homelessness, and all of the challenges that you face, I again congratulate you for making sure that you still live up to what you believe is your responsibility as an American. Because I know that just as you all pledge allegiance to this country, and we should be treating you in a much, much better way. So I thank you for being here, and I just want to ask you that if there were two things you wanted us to go back and put into this report today, what would it be? And I'm going to start with Mr. White Owl and go straight down the line.
Well, I think it's definitely to remember the government and trust responsibility and relationship you have with tribes. That goes with between the tribes and the federal government of the United States. And in a solution form, to go back and remember, is to help us with helping to be able to ensure votes through the polling places and proximity. Do not forget proximity and the distances that have to be traveled. For us at Fort Berthold, it was in the Four Bears district. We had to travel 80 miles to Watford City round trip, or to a little tiny town that is north of Watford City called Cartwright. That is about 120 miles round trip for us to be able to cast a vote if we weren't able to get to the mail-in ballots. So it's one of those things where please take those two things back with proximity and accessibility.
Thank you, Ms. LeCount.
Thank you, Mr. Whiteowl. I would agree with Mr. Whiteowl's comments. Thank you, Chairperson Fudge, and please don't forget about us. We are here often with 12 to 20 people in one household, so accessing an ID is burdensome for our communities, and the knowledge and work towards uniform street addressing is something that's really foreign to us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Ms. Pearson, just know that in this age of technology, if we can't find you, it's just ridiculous. It's just outrageous that we can't find somebody who's lived in the same place for 20 years. And with that, please.
Okay, thank you, Representative Chairperson Fudge. I don't know if this is going to make a difference or if it's worth something looking into, but remember next year is our census. And perhaps maybe we can blend this together where, you know, everyone gets a fair chance at everything, you know, and we're able to count our numbers. We're able to maybe, you know, do physical addresses for people like that. But I think it's an important thing to try and blend it in here with the North Dakota voting laws that, you know, we encounter today and the obstacles that we have to jump over. But I know our census was kind of underrated last time, and I look forward to, you know, seeing those increase. My chairmanship with the Spirit Lake Tribe is going to end next month, and I have not gone, you know, taken any steps to run again or anything like that. But I do look forward to helping my people at the Spirit Lake Tribe, and this is one thing I asked if I can help with is this the census and this voting law that, you know, I have plenty of time to work on that, but I'd like to you know to go back and consider something like this too, where we can blend it together and maybe get two projects done with, you know, one big effort, and that effort's going to include all of us. And any questions? Yeah, you know.
Thank you. You know, it's just interesting to me that we're trying to take money away from the Postal Service and we can't find you. And we can't deliver to your house. Maybe the government should just put an address on your house and make the post office deliver to you. Mr. Walker, please close us out briefly.
Thank you again. One of my recommendations, first and foremost, is that this committee, and also not only members of this committee, but also the House of Representatives, is to educate yourself. It's been very evident today that the lack of knowledge and understanding of distinct tribal nations here today, there's a lack of understanding, and that to me is concerning because the decisions that are made on our behalf in the House. I would say after this closeout, I'd like a copy of what, if there is a plan of action in regards to this. Just don't let this be a check in the box and say we went and we had field hearings doing this. It happens all the time. And I'm not saying this to be pessimistic. I'm saying it with optimism because you're actually here, and I thank you for that. Whatever we have in our written testimony, don't let it just be that. Reach out to all the tribal nations, get to know what's going on day to day on our nations, because we didn't do this to ourselves, obviously.
Thank you. Let me just say on behalf of the ranking member and myself, the ranking member is here because we do want this to be a bipartisan effort. But let me assure you, you have my word. You will get a report. You have my word. We are collecting this data so that we can do a report, so that we can go back to the Congress of the United States and say to them, this is what needs to happen to ensure that every American has the right to vote, the unfettered, unabridged right to vote. So you will get a report. It will probably be sometime in the fall, but you will get a report. I want to thank all of you for being here. I especially want to thank our ranking member. I want to thank all of the witnesses, of course, for their testimony, and we have your written testimony as well as your verbal testimony. I'd like to thank Standing Rock Sioux Tribal Council for hosting us today. It has been a pleasure to get to meet you all, and I thank you for the work that you are doing on behalf of the tribes of North and South Dakota. I want to thank the staff who has been so helpful in making sure that this happened today. And lastly, I want to thank my colleagues for being here. And with that, this subcommittee, next panel. I don't want to adjourn. We got another panel. If this panel could allow us to reset, and if you could just come up, you know, if we'd like to just take a photograph for our report, if that's okay with you all. Please come up.
Thank you.
Mic check 1 2 1 2 1 2 check 1 2.
Okay.
Deb Holland made sure she made me promise to come and say hello. She think you
Oh.
1 2 3 4 5. 1 2 3 4 5 check 1 2.
Yeah. Like regardless. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks. Back to this mark because we have voting at 1. They're really strict. If we're not there, they said they'll send the highway patrol to find us to come vote. Send them. That's like just send them. Finally, hey, get some protection.
Just escort me back at 80 miles an hour, please. You're gonna be great. You're gonna like close us up. Really helpful in establishing this because my first testimony was basically like a book report, right? And when I got to talk to them, I was like, oh, make it personal.
Good morning again. Thank you all. We are going to start our second panel. So I want to introduce the witnesses on the second panel, and I'm going to start with the other end because we understand that Representative Buffalo does have a time schedule, so we're going to start on her end. And I'd introduce North Dakota State Representative District 27, Ruth Buffalo. Secondly, we have Prairie Rose Seminole, a community organizer. Thank you for being here. And lastly, Jacqueline DeLeon, Staff Attorney, Native American Rights Fund. Thank you all so much for being here. Ms. Buffalo, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Madashi Mia Adesh Heads. My name is Ruth Buffalo, Woman Appears. Chairwoman Fudge, Ranking Member Davis, thank you for having me here today. Here in North Dakota, I represent Fargo's District 27, which is 370 miles from my traditional homelands of the Fort Berthold Reservation. Fargo is not a majority Native American district. By going door to door, knocking on thousands of doors, I was able to earn the trust of the people of Fargo, and I'm proud to represent them today. Sadly, even if I were to run in my reservation, that district would not be majority Native American. Most of my reservation is encompassed by the legislative district, District 4. Only one MHA member has ever been elected, but that individual lived in Garrison, which is located off of the reservation. District 4 overwhelmingly does have a white population that overwhelms the Native vote. Tribal citizens make up 31.8% of the district, despite there being a sizable Native American population. 5,632 members currently live on the Fort Berthold Reservation, with another 3,655 living in close proximity, yet there are no majority Native American districts. If maps were drawn another way, Native Americans could easily support their own district. In fact, the dilution of the Native vote is even more outrageous if you look at the counties. There are 6 counties that intersect the Fort Berthold Reservation. ensuring no Native American representation among county seats. It is disrespectful to the people of the Fort Berthold Reservation to subject them not only to voter dilution, but also to confusion as they move from county to vote. Not one county official is currently responsible for ensuring that the needs of all of the Fort Berthold people are being met. There are also voting irregularities, as mentioned by our tribal dignitary. In the recent midterm election of 2018, 2 traditional voting precincts were shut down within the exterior boundaries of the Fort Berthold Reservation. Dunn County North Fox Precinct, located in Mandaree at St. Anthony Church, McKenzie County Forebears Precinct. If the county representatives more accurately reflected the MHA people, they would have known that these were important voting sites and would not have shut them down. The voter ID law is the latest example of the North Dakota's attempt to disenfranchise Native voters. The law's chief sponsor was my predecessor in the legislature. I can attest that as I campaigned and went door to door, natives and non-natives alike were outraged by the law. I heard over and over again people saying, how could they do that? Because if people don't have addresses, they shouldn't require them to show an address if they are qualified to vote. It's plainly unfair to everyone who has heard about the law. To me, I question why would anyone intentionally prohibit an individual from practicing their right to participate in our democracy? Since 2016, the world was made aware of exactly how unjust the original inhabitants of this land, the tribal nations, are treated. North Dakota has unfortunately been referred to as the Deep North, as many others have witnessed the unjust treatment of our tribal nation neighbors. If the intent was not to suppress voters' access to voting, why does the state still defend this law? Why don't they allow the court orders that would have allowed people to vote to stand? The maps are drawn unfairly, and the Native vote is suppressed through North Dakota's current voter ID law. I'm proud to be the first Native American Democratic woman legislator, but I should not be alone. American Indians comprise 1.4% of the North Dakota legislature, but they only represent 5.5% of the state population. Furthermore, we have a total of 141 state legislators, 94 in the House, 15 are Democratic Nonpartisan League, 79 are of the majority, the Republican Party. In the Senate, we have a total of 47 members, 10 are Democratic Nonpartisan Leaguers, and 37 are of the majority party, the Republicans. But representation does matter. I can personally attest that representation is important. Since my time in the legislature, I've been able to introduce legislation to address long-festering and ignored problems. One bill requires law enforcement training on missing and murdered Indigenous people. Another bill starts a repository collecting data of missing persons, including our Indigenous population. 2 other bills require hotels to train their staff to identify signs of human trafficking and to teach them what to do to respond. I also introduced a bill that would allow Native American students to wear regalia at graduation, a point of cultural pride that is too often misunderstood and disparaged, even though Native American students should have the right to proudly represent who they are when they are being honored for their accomplishments. Prior to my time at the legislature in the 65th Legislative Assembly in 2017, there was horrendous legislation being introduced which primarily targeted the Native Americans in our state of North Dakota, triggered by the opposition of the Dakota Access Pipeline. It would allow for individuals to hit protesters with their vehicles without legal consequence. How is that a civil response, no matter what one thinks about the pipeline? To this day, there are a few bills lingering from this very mindset in this session of the 66th Legislative Assembly. Indeed, too often Native people in the state of North Dakota are disparaged and put into second-class citizen status. As a public official, unfortunately, I've been subjected to this abuse. When I was running, I would receive racist calls. For example, one woman mocked me and called me Injun. After at one public office, I have received threats against my children. Being on the receiving end of these taunts and threats is not only frightening, it is demeaning and racist. And that type of behavior should not exist in 2019. I will continue to work hard to represent the people of Fargo, North Dakota, and Native Americans across this state. However, federal action is needed to make sure our voices are not abused. Thank you for coming today to listen and for bringing attention to these injustices. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Semino.
And Nawa Wedegosted. Thank you, Chairwoman Fudge and committee members. Thank you for coming and welcome to North Dakota, and thank you to the Standing Rock Nation for hosting. As a young adult, I started organizing around issues such as healthcare, marriage equality, economic equity, and others. Voting and civic engagement have been a revolving door of efforts for nearly 20 of my years, constantly needing to fight for a right given to all citizens. As you read earlier, Chairwoman Fudge, American Indian people were given citizenship and the right to vote in 1924, whether we wanted to or not. Unfortunately, states had the authority to implement voting barriers that prevented our American Indian population from voting. In North Dakota, we had to give up our tribal identity to vote, essentially a strategy of erasure of the indigenous people from this area. Considering American Indians have served in every branch of the U.S. military for well over the past 200 years, it goes without saying that their efforts and histories of distinguished services should be recognized. The fact that American Indians serve at a high rate and have a higher concentration of female service members than any other ethnic demographic in the United States, we still have to fight for our right to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 created a false ending of the state-by-state efforts of tribal nations fighting the issues in courts for the right to vote. States still found ways to create arbitrary barriers to voting. North Dakota in 2010, for example, during the fight for affordable health care and workers' rights, as organizers, along with Democratic leadership, including Senator Byron Dorgan, were fighting to create more polling locations for tribal voters, specifically in Benson County on the Spirit Lake Reservation. At that time, there was only one polling location that wasn't accessible to all voters in the district. The decision was made to make an additional polling site, only to have that site made inaccessible by floodwaters in the spring. Consistently, even in 2018, the previous county auditors of Sioux County for the Standing Rock Reservation inefficiently equipped the polling sites with ballots, many times running out and denying people the opportunity to vote because there were no more ballots. The Fort Berthold Reservation, divided by 6 voting districts that are set up to confuse and create barriers because of the distance voters have to travel to cast an in-person ballot. People who drove an hour to vote only to be told that they are the wrong polling location. A conversation is to also make some or all of our precincts on Fort Berthold Reservation mail-in only, which also creates a barrier as postal stations are closing in the rural communities of North Dakota. As an organizer, we organize people to write letters to editors to create visibility on the issue, as well as people to testify at the state legislature hearings on the need for more polling locations. Legislators often refer to the county auditor's authority of establishing polling locations and how many ballots to have on hand. In 2009, 2010, we were basically told that it wasn't a big enough issue for state legislators to waste time on the issue of American Indian voters having barriers in place, formerly in one of the most voting-friendly states in the country. In 2012, we started to see polling locations deny people their right to vote for not having proper identification. Voters could still vote by having an affidavit filled out on their behalf. In the next years, the state legislature voted to end the affidavit system and required voting IDs to have a physical address. And you've heard some of this testimony before, so I'm going to fast forward here. In 2018, I partnered with tribal colleges and funders to educate American Indian voters of their power of voting, especially in response to the Supreme Court upholding the North Dakota law. In essence, establishing a crisis across tribes in North Dakota to equip voters with acceptable forms of identification. The state of North Dakota did not put forward any effort to fund the mandated requirement. Tribal members, citizens of North Dakota implemented incredible efforts to build voter turnout accomplished in the 2018 elections. With less than a month to scale local efforts to reach potential tens of thousands of Native voters in North Dakota who needed new IDs to vote. Election day 2018, I was also present in Newtown, North Dakota, where students were denied their rights to vote, and the administration of the tribal college, the Nueto Datsasanish College, printed residency papers for these students who were later allowed to vote because of the leadership of the tribal college. I learned in 2018, working with national organization pushing the Native vote, that as American Indian voters, we do not show up to the vote unless we are engaged. We as a voting bloc have been left out of the civic process for so long that some have grown apathetic, yet we are the most legislated demographic in the entire country. We have to vote, we have a power when we vote. So in 2000, it is only recent history that we've been allowed to vote, and mobilized efforts around values of education, healthcare, infrastructure, and sovereignty that are all at risk when we don't vote. Efforts raised money for tribes to become equipped with technology that met the need to make the IDs needed for tribal members and citizens of North Dakota. There continues to be barriers, interpersonal and systemic, at our polling locations in our tribal communities and for our Native voters across the state. The result of high voter turnout of Native voters in North Dakota has always been the result of significant on-the-ground organizing efforts and education happening in tribal communities by volunteers and paid staff from partisan and nonpartisan organizations committed to building consistent, engaged, informed voting communities. I continue to do this work so that there are no more barriers in place for our American Indian voters and advance our inherent rights of citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. De Leon.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fudge, Ranking Member Davis, and members for having me testify today and for coming to Indian Country. And thank you to the Standing Rock Tribe for this warm welcome. My name is Jacqueline De Leon. I'm a member of the Sleta Pueblo and a staff attorney for the Native American Rights Fund, also known as NARF, the nation's oldest nonprofit law firm dedicated to advancing the rights of Native Americans. Today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of how the voter ID law came to be because it provides important context for the powerful testimony we're hearing today. In 2014, NARF received a request for assistance regarding Native Americans in North Dakota that were being turned away from the polls. NARF began its investigation and was appalled to learn that veterans, school teachers, elders, and other lifelong voters were being rejected by poll workers that had known these individuals their entire lives. NARF decided that this was a case worth investing our limited resources. I mentioned resources because the burden of proof in Voting Rights Act and constitutional cases alleging voter discrimination is extremely high, which means that in order to prevail in these cases, litigators must invest substantial resources. And unfortunately, NARF cannot address every injustice facing Native American voters today. During the course of our investigation, we were alarmed to learn that one of the legislators' motivations for passing the voter ID law was to suppress the Native American vote because of the unexpected victory of Democrat Heidi Heitkamp in the 2012 senatorial election, who won by less than 3,000 votes. The Native American vote was widely attributed to her win. We know this was their motivation because in 2011, the North Dakota legislator considered a new voter ID law that would have limited the valid forms of voter ID and gotten rid of the state's affidavit system where a voter swears to their qualifications. Throughout consideration of the bill, legislators on both sides of the aisle raised concerns about disenfranchisement. Additionally, the legislator was informed during these deliberations that there were Native Americans that lacked residential addresses. The legislator decided 38-8 on a bipartisan basis not to enact the proposed changes to the voter ID laws, given the concerns about disenfranchisement. After Senator Heitkamp's win, however, the legislator quickly changed course and immediately passed the law that greatly restricted the acceptable forms of voter identification, required residential addresses on all IDs, and eliminated all fail-safes. The legislator never analyzed whether Native American voters, it was told, lacked addresses in 2011, still lacked addresses. Indeed, those Native American voters continue to lack addresses to this day. Even more conspicuously, the legislator utilized a hog house amendment by replacing the entire text of an unrelated bill with the new text to pass the bill without any debate. As expected, the impact on Native Americans on vote in 2014 was severe. In 2016, NARF sought an injunction on the law on behalf of 7 brave Turtle Mountain plaintiffs that were disenfranchised by the laws. The U.S. District Court in North Dakota granted the injunction, finding the law violated the U.S. Constitution and required that North Dakota again implement the affidavit system. Judge Hovland stated, "It is clear that that a safety net is needed for those voters who simply cannot obtain a qualifying ID with reasonable effort." In 2017, in response to the decision from the district court, the North Dakota legislature amended the voter ID law. But despite, at this point, being well informed of the law's discriminatory effects, it did not get rid of the discriminatory parts of the law. It still required all voters to have an ID that had a residential address. We again brought suit, and the court granted another injunction, barring the state from enforcing the newest version, but this time the state was ordered to allow P.O. boxes, which are utilized significantly by the Native American community due to their lack of addresses, to prove residency. The order also expanded the types of acceptable IDs. The state appealed to the 8th Circuit, and the 8th Circuit stayed the court's injunction, allowing the law's requirement of a residential address to go forward. We appealed to the Supreme Court, which was denied. After appeal to the Supreme Court was denied, significant media attention descended upon North Dakota. Senator Heitkamp was running for re-election. It was feared that the effects of the discriminatory voter ID law would unfairly impact the outcome of the race. NARF then took 2 actions. First, it worked with tribal leaders and local community activists to marshal resources. I personally was inspired by the decisive leadership that the tribal leaders here took today. All of the tribes quickly moved to administer free IDs to their members and worked day and night to respond. Community activists such as Prairie Rose, Daniel Finn, O.J. Siemens Sr., Barbara Siemens, Nicole Donaghy, and notably the High School Native American Youth Council on the Turtle Mountain Reservation mounted a tremendous get out the vote effort. I thank these individuals for their heroic efforts and commend them on a job well done. Second, NARF teamed with local council Team Purdon and Campaign Legal Center to find an emergency temporary restraining order on behalf of the Spirit Lake Tribe and 6 individual plaintiffs, but this was denied. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe has since joined this suit, which is ongoing. As of today, the North Dakota voter ID law still stands. Voters are still required to present a qualifying ID and list a residential address in order to vote. Yet Native Americans across North Dakota still disproportionately lack residential addresses and the resources necessary to obtain qualifying ID. As the cameras move on from North Dakota, so do the resources that made the Herculean response to the ID law in this last election possible. Unfortunately, the story of discrimination and disenfranchisement in North Dakota is not an isolated one. Across the country, Native Americans are being denied fair access to the ballot box. Given the tremendous cost of litigating voting cases, NARF cannot address every injustice, and federal action is needed to prevent the continued disenfranchisement of Native Americans. I thank you for coming to hear these stories and for shedding a much-needed light on these issues.
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony. I do know that our representative has to go back. She's in session, and we clearly understand that. So if any of the members have a question that is directly or is going to be directed to Representative Buffalo, if you could ask your question now so she can get back into session. All right. We'll go in order as we did before. Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think the question that I had to the last panel might have been more appropriate to this panel. And let me just begin with you, Representative Buffalo. Apparently, there are 47 legislative districts in North Dakota. Am I right?
Correct, yes.
Each district has a state senator,
Yes,
and each district has 2 House members.
yes,
Okay? And every 10 years, the state legislature draws the lines and creates these 47 districts.
yes.
Okay? Among these 47 districts, how many Native Americans serve in the state Senate?
1.
How many serve in the state House?
As of this recent
Yes.
election, myself.
1 and 1.
Yes.
Okay. In drawing these lines every 10 years, do Native Americans have input into the drawing of the lines aside from the one legislator that's in the state legislature? Do they go out to the reservations and consult with tribal leaders and citizens and have public hearings such as this?
Madam Chair
Yeah.
and Representative Butterfield, not that I'm aware, no.
Okay. Do you have any suspicion that these 47 lines are gerrymandered in such a way that dilute the ability of Native Americans to elect legislators?
Madam Chair and Representative, most definitely.
And the subdividing of these districts, the 47 districts, each one is then subdivided into 2 parts. Do you have any concerns about the way those lines are drawn as well?
Madam Chair and Representative, definitely there's grave concerns there. Even within the district that I'm currently representing, I could easily be sliced out. And based off of the approach that I've taken, this issue of voter access should not be a partisan issue, but there is retaliation, there is attacks. And so that's something that is on the radar daily, but I will not be silenced. I will continue to stand up.
Please know that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is available to the citizens of North Dakota. It is nationwide in its application, and it's a permanent law, and it can be used to change the political landscape of your state. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Ranking Member Davis.
Thank you. Ms. Buffalo, congratulations on your election. I was at the Capitol yesterday. I did not get a chance to meet you when I went into the House chamber and went into the Senate chamber, but congratulations. Again, from Illinois, many of the numbers that you mentioned of a majority Republican leadership in both your House and Senate here are flipped in my home state. And many of the same concerns I think Mr. Butterfield raised about gerrymandering are some of the similar concerns we have in our home state too. The biggest threat that we have to fair elections is actually, in my opinion, partisanship. And we've got to do everything we can to focus more on bipartisan solutions. Now, in your state representative district, how many constituents do you represent?
In District 27? In District 27, it's on the eastern side of the state, so it's in South Fargo. I represent at least 5,000 constituents.
So
And-
5,000 constituents, and how many of them are registered voters?
Madam Chair and Representative, within the state of North Dakota, we do not have a voter registration
Okay.
requirement.
Okay, so about 5,000 individuals, calculate percentage. You could say over half might be eligible to vote. Was the turnout higher in the Fargo area too, even though it's not typically Native American sovereign nations?
Madam Chair and Representative Rodney Davis, the voter turnout was high across the United States in this midterm election because our communities know what's at stake. Unfortunately, people of color, Indigenous people, women are being targeted right now. Hate crimes have risen within this current administration. People know what's at stake, and people are getting out to vote so that our families will be protected. Because currently, we aren't protected under this current administration.
Well, Madam Representative, as somebody who personally had to dodge bullets on a baseball field from someone who was inspired by not the President of the United States, but others because of hateful rhetoric coming on all sides, I concur. There's a lot of hate. There's a lot of rhetoric that led me and my friends to have to run from a gunman screaming healthcare as he was trying to kill all of us one morning in Virginia almost 2 years ago, watching my colleague lay on the ground and almost die, and other friends bleeding on the ground, watching a African-American Capitol Police hero get shot in the ankle. I can tell you that there is a lot of hate in this world, and it's not limited to the president. It's not limited to one side, and I think we all ought to work together to make sure what I went through and what my colleagues went through never happens again. But let's not forget that. Let's work together. Again, bipartisan solutions are what matters here. And I appreciate your service. I appreciate the time, and I want to spend some more of my time actually talking to some of the other witnesses. So, Ms. De Leon, thank you for.
Madam Chair.
Oh, we're just
Asking
doing.
her questions
All right. Well, Representative Buffalo,
So she can get back to work.
I look forward to working with you and the legislature here and finding solutions. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much. Representative, I identify probably more than any other people. I would not be elected in Mississippi had it not been for the Voting Rights Act. In Mississippi, you had to own land to run for public office. We challenged that law under the Voting Rights Act, and we won. And so, long time ago, I understand that. My mother was a school teacher, but she could not vote because she was African American. When we beat that law back, then she had to interpret the Constitution of the United States, even though she had a college degree. The person who administered the test to her had not finished the 8th grade. And so there are a lot of things that happen. One of the things I'm committed to, as Mr. Davis said, is that, look, if we are Americans, then we should act like Americans and do the right thing. So are you aware that when the legislature changed the law implementing the street address, did they provide monies to Native Americans for that transfer of responsibility, or did they just pass the law and no resources?
Madam Chair and Representative Thompson, to my knowledge, there hasn't been additional resources. To my knowledge, there has been a strong lack of communication and outreach to prevent what happened in this last election, which left communities scrambling. My understanding is that counties do receive funding for their Native American headcount. So there is a disconnect there that needs to be addressed.
In other words, it was more or less an unfunded mandate on Native Americans to say, you have to have an address, but we're not going to give you the money necessary to complete the process. We'll just establish it.
Madam Chair and Representative Thompson, to my knowledge, no. I could be wrong, but I would be willing to go back and find that specific information. But to that end, I only have a few minutes, and I think that it's important that we work further upstream. I agree with Representative Rodney Davis. We do need to work together, and this has been generations upon generations upon generations of overdue. We need to work further upstream. The true history of our people needs to be told. Comments saying, you know, well, turnout was great, wasn't it? That is inappropriate and unacceptable. Because that's almost saying like, oh, well, your kids, we mandated your children to be sent to the boarding schools to become civilized. But they're educated now, aren't they? It's the same thing and it's inappropriate. But it's due to a lack of education truly of who we are and which land we stand on today.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your time. We appreciate your
Lots of
coming.
good
We know
thank
it's
you.
a distance. Thank you so much. Mr. Davis, you can go back to your 5 minutes with your questions. Mr. Davis for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. De Leon, so are you a registered voter in North Dakota?
No, I'm not. North Dakota doesn't have registration.
Have you ever voted?
And
Have
I'm
you
in
ever voted?
Colorado. I live
So
in
you live in
Colorado.
Colorado? Okay. So with North Dakota, as we look at the election results, I mean, clearly, obviously, Representative Buffalo doesn't want us to discuss the facts about turnout when it comes to increased electoral participation, which I think is great. I think it's across the board. It's not offensive. Frankly, that's the numbers. That's what we should see. We want to see everybody participate. So when you have made a commitment for Native American voting rights with the Native American Rights Fund. Given your experience in this area, I'm curious to hear your thoughts specifically on VRA's, on the Voting Rights Act Sections 2 and 3. What, if any, changes would you implement to Sections 2 and 3?
So first, in regards to the voter turnout, I'll just say that, we don't think that outrage is a get out the vote strategy, right? I think that, Native American, it was a coincidence that national attention was paid to North Dakota. There are voter suppression issues going on throughout Indian country that aren't nearly getting the attention or resources that were poured into North Dakota because it just so happened that Senator Heitkamp at the time was running for re-election. And the Senate balance of power was, elevated this issue to the national stage.
So this was all a conspiracy to beat Heidi Heitkamp?
Well, I think that it was certainly the case that the legislator enacted the law in order to suppress the Native American vote in response to Senator Heitkamp's win.
But again, it was historic high turnout in the Native American counties here in North Dakota.
Well, that was a reflection of resources. I think throughout voting cases, what we see is that resources turn into votes. That's not a surprise. That's true across the nation. The more resources that you have, the more votes that you can have turned out to the polls. There were, because of the outrage, because of the clear unfairness of the law, thousands of dollars were pumped into North Dakota outside community organizers paired with local community organizers to get out the vote. And so, there were concerts, there were public figures that came to rally.
You're talking to somebody who ran a race that we probably had about $14 million combined spent. I understand resources matter and getting your message out and getting your vote out, but you still haven't answered my question on Section 2 and 3, and I'm getting a little shorter on
I
time.
apologize. Yes, so I think that, Section 2 should certainly be, it exists today, and that we should have more resources, I think Section 2 is fine as it stands. I think that the section that we should be focused on is Section 5, which ended up, getting rid of pre-clearance requirements. And I think that the focus should be on Congress reforming Section 5 in order to allow, because of the tremendous litigation costs associated with these bringing voting rights claims, legislators should be prevented from passing those laws in the first place.
Okay. We appreciate your work. We appreciate the time you've spent here. And one other question, since you mentioned that, you still feel that that many changes were made to the voting process here in the state to affect one senatorial election. What was the margin of victory for Senator Kramer?
I think it was quite large. I think that, at the end of the day, voter turnout across the midterm elections was very high, and North Dakota remains a pretty strong Republican stronghold.
So it was high all around, and Senator Kramer won by a substantial margin. And even though there were many resources put into areas to drive up the vote that would have been stronger for one candidate over the other, which in turn, again, in the most non-offensive way possible, I can tell you, higher turnout matters, success matters, and I hope it's emulated across the board everywhere in this country.
Yes, sir. I think that's what made Senator Heitkamp's victory in 2012 so surprising, and that's why the legislator responds so severely.
Well, thank you for your time. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure I will use all of my time. In the interest of time, did I understand that 1.4% of the 5.5% of the state's population is Native American? Does that sound right? 1 out of 20, perhaps. But 1 out of 4% of the legislature is Native American. That is a huge disparity. Your legislative representation does not reflect reasonably the population of the state. Ms. DeLeon, how do you pronounce your last name?
DeLeon.
DeLeon. Has there been any Section 2 litigation around redistricting in North Dakota in recent years?
Not in North Dakota, no. In South Dakota, there's been significant Section 2 litigation.
Of course, as you and I both know, Section 2 is a very powerful weapon. It's a very expensive weapon,
Yes.
but it's a very powerful weapon.
Yes, sir.
And so certainly citizens of North Dakota who've been disenfranchised and marginalized by voter laws certainly need to take up the right to bring Section 2 actions. I think you will be very pleased with the results. It may not always happen, but it will certainly happen if you would pursue litigation. Polling place locations, that's very fertile ground for Section 2 litigation. The absence of Native Americans as staff at these polling places, I think, is a subject that needs to be addressed. So I'd like to encourage the Native American Rights Fund to consider investing and litigating in Section 2. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you, sir.
I yield back.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you. Ms. Seminole, one of the other hallmarks of the Voting Rights Act was pre-clearance. And for a long time, when I was a local elected official, every time a precinct was proposed to be moved or abolished, that had to be submitted to justice under a VRA requirement. And somebody in justice would call and say, are you aware of this? Was this public knowledge? And in many instances, the public didn't know, and justice said, no, in America, the public has a right to know if you are tampering or, quote, improving the electoral process. And in many instances in my state, those efforts were turned down simply because the public didn't know. And one of the hallmarks of the act was just that. that the public has a right to know. The precincts that I'm hearing about, did the people who were registered voters, did they receive letters saying your precinct's been moved?
Well, because we don't have voter registration in North Dakota, the public's not notified in the same way that states that have voter registration. Unfortunately, our native populations are notified frequently by these types of hearings through the county selected newspapers, which are often not read by the native populations.
So actually, your situation is even worse than those areas that have registration, because there's no real
accountability
document that people can work from to notify individuals. So you could conceivably go to your last precinct you voted at in another election, and all of a sudden, it's no longer there.
Yeah, we're actually looking at Section 2 as a tool in the upcoming census numbers. 2020 is going to be telling, because historically the tribes in North Dakota have been undercounted because of kind of a arbitrary rule of head of household, how many head of households you can have within a location. And so families have been undercounted because they'd say only 2 heads of household will be counted in their families, right, their descendants. And then using the census as a tool then for redistricting, and also encouraging our legislature to consult with tribes. That's historically not been done as well. Even with this voting rights law in the state of North Dakota, there was no consultation with tribes. And so our legislature has historically left out conversations with our tribal communities, and in sometimes inviting tribal leadership to different meetings, but those are not necessarily public to the community members to be present at those meetings. So, I mean, they're public meetings, but not notification has been sent that they're public meetings, so our tribal members don't go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. De Leon, is your work location specific?
No, not at all. We practice nationwide.
Okay. Let me just say a couple of things. One is that we are here today so that we're collecting data across the country to satisfy the decision in Shelby. Now, mind you, Shelby did not say that there was not discrimination. It said exactly the opposite, that discrimination does still exist. What they said was the formula that you are using to determine pre-clearance is too old, and the data is too old. So what we're doing now is trying to update the data so that we can, in fact, provide enough information to come up with an accurate formula for Section 4. So then we can, of course, then put back into effect Section 5 pre-clearance and have a fully functioning Voting Rights Act. So that is our real responsibility as we are here. I think that all of the tribes had to go and create these IDs at the last minute at such great expense should send the federal government a bill. Maybe under HAVA we could pay you for all of the work, because what we really have done is create a poll tax by requiring that people go out and buy an ID that they don't need for any other reason but to vote. They don't need it to drive because they don't drive. They don't need it for any other reason. So in fact, the state has created a poll tax on your reservations and all of the people who live in them. You think that's right?
I agree. Yes, I do. It was a burden put on the people of North Dakota, which created a disparity for their American Indian population, rural voters, and college students, and therefore those demographics had to come up with the means to go vote. That's essentially it. We had to create means to go vote.
And do you think that some of the voting that occurred in this last election in particular, just as across the country, was people being angry about one thing or another, or being encouraged in a different way than they had been in the past?
I think it was a combination. I think people who sent money to North Dakota for these various tribal needs and get out the vote efforts were still upset about the retaliation that they heard from the state of North Dakota implementing laws against the Dakota Access Pipeline protesters and people, but also seeing that this disparity of with less than a month to election day that people had to now provide these means, they were fired up because of this urgency that was created for this crisis. And so there was this combination of like, we need to support the Native people and the Native voices, because why are they fighting to prove that they're the original people of these lands to go vote? I mean, we've been here for time immemorial, and we still had to prove that we have a right to vote. There was a lot of urgency created during those times, and people responded to it.
And lastly, to you both, if there were, and I've asked this of the other panel, if there is two things that you want us to take back to the U.S. House of Representatives that you think would make voting easier, or just deal with the populations that you deal with on a regular basis, what would those two things be? We'll start with you, Ms. De Leon.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So first, I would say that North Dakota is not an isolated instance. Throughout the country, Native Americans are subjected to unfair discriminatory laws and burdens that are keeping them from voting. NARF, over this past year, and I'm going to make the report available to the committee, conducted a series of 9 field hearings across the country asking this question of why is it that Native Americans have such low turnouts? And what we found were alarming results, unreasonable distance to the polls, which we've heard today, terrible conditions, road conditions that make it impossible to get to polling locations, gerrymandering, et cetera. The lack of residential address is going to affect things as we move towards mail-in voting and voting in North Dakota. And then overt discrimination. Not only do we see it structurally through laws, but we also saw individuals throughout the country, county officials that treated Native Americans with disdain, that, when somebody would come in to vote, the entire polling location would fall silent and stare at them. Like you mentioned, voting out of a chicken coop is unacceptable. There are other incidences like this all over the country. So, Native American discrimination at the polling locations is not unique to North Dakota. So we sincerely urge, federal action. And the second thing that I'll say is that right now the laws, Section 2, I'm very grateful for Representative Butterfield, and I will pursue every case that I can. But as you mentioned, they're very expensive. And it is prohibitively expensive for a small organization like NARF to reach every single instance of discrimination that's happening across this country. And so we really urge you to take action. Thank you.
Thank you. Pray Rose Semino, last word.
Sure. First is to ensure that there's tribal consultation regarding the existing voting rights laws as well as proposed laws. We need that education, and we need to build trust with tribal communities within the system that we've been neglected from for such a long time. Voting is new relatively for a lot of our communities. And the other piece is, our tribal communities, our tribal economies really took the burden of cost for an initiative like this. So, just encompassing accessibility is, the other panelists had spoke to that earlier, but accessibility to voting and ensuring our right to vote.
I thank you both so much for your testimony today. Thank you. And we will move to our third and final panel. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure.
Excuse me, could you come up and just take the photograph with us as well, since you're the only person on this panel?
Oh, okay.
Thank you all so much. As you see, our panel is getting smaller. Our members, just as the representative, they have to get back as well. So the ranking member and I were going to conduct this last panel. So we thank our members who were here, and we have been looking forward to your testimony. Oliver OJ is what they call you, Simmons Sr., Co-Executive Director of Four Directions. The floor is yours, sir. You have 5 minutes, or they're close to it.
Oh, Mindaki api. We chose on you, before I start, I want to say my relatives, I wish you health and health. I want to acknowledge and recognize the people that are our ancestors from the Ochedi Shikoin that were here before us. I want to thank Standing Rock for our brothers and sisters for bringing us. It wasn't that long ago that we were sitting here talking to the tribal council about the law that was created. Before we go, I also want to recognize, and I think this is important, the media such as the New York Times, Washington Post, Time Magazine, Think Progress, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, Rachel Maddow, Joy Reid, Al Sharpton, BuzzFeed, local news media, and the Center for Public Integrity, because without them, I don't think we'd have this hearing. I mean, they were able to get our voice out there to say, hey, we have a problem here, and we need to deal with it. I and my wife, who is a co-director of Four Directions, we live on the Rosebud Sioux Tribal Indian Reservation in South Dakota. I heard you mention earlier that South Dakota has more litigation probably than any other state. We were basically responsible for that. We have filed under Section 2 voter denial cases in South Dakota twice. We learned, as we went along, litigation is not the way to go, but sometimes that's the only avenue you have. In South Dakota, after filing litigation under Section 2, basically we asked the state of South Dakota to establish satellite offices on the Indian reservations in South Dakota. They fought it, basically saying they didn't have the money. After they spent a bunch of money in federal court, they decided that, yes, they do have the money. And I can tell you that any county or any state that says they don't have the funds to open up a satellite office on reservations throughout the United States, everyone that we've sued so far, once they've done it, they have not filed bankruptcy. So we know they'll be safe once this is done. What we learned in South Dakota, we took to Montana. We went and we settled that case. Now there are 13 satellite offices in the state of Montana. The voter native vote has increased substantially. We then went to Nevada. In Nevada, we established 2 more satellite offices. The state legislators worked with the tribes, and now they can have up to 27 satellite offices in Nevada. What we want to bring to your attention today is the Help American Vote Act funds. This is something that is under the preview of the House, in which we don't need new laws. We already have it there. And what we would like the House to consider is opening up HAVA funds, specifically identifying tribes throughout the United States, which would be able to, the states would utilize those HAVA funds to establish satellite offices. I heard earlier about the how Senator Kramer was able to substantially beat Senator Heidkamp. I and other organizations here were part of the historic voter turnout in North Dakota in a midterm election. But I also want to tell you how I think he might have won by substantial numbers. In North Dakota, you have early voting, which means that 14 days prior to the election, you can go and you can vote. And if you pass away, your vote still counts. Under this North Dakota law, over 400,000, this is from the census, over 400,000 of the white population has access to vote early, 14 days, over 400,000, 2/3 of the white population. Indian country, living on a reservation, 0. Now, you want to talk about unequal, that's about as unequal as you're going to get. You give me, if I was running against you, even if they don't know me, you give me 14 days and allow me to have 400,000 plus voters, I'm going to beat you. And that's what happened here. So what we're proposing is that you use the HAVA funds to allow counties and states to establish early voting, in-person voting, satellite offices on the reservation. You allow them to come and do in-person voter registration. One more thing, and the light's on, I know they were talking about 911 addresses. One of the things that happened here, the state of North Dakota got funding, and they were able to get funding through cell phones, landlines. They took that funding and they took the money from tribal members, from tribes that was a surcharge. And this was to create 911 numbers or addresses. Well, the state never did it. They knew they never did it. They got the money to do it. They got it from our tribal members. They got it from our tribes. And then they turn around and they create a law that requires you to have an address, a physical address, when they know they didn't do what they were supposed to do to begin with when they got the money. So there are problems. And this is not a partisan issue. I can tell you, we are nonpartisan. We sued Democrats, we sued Republicans. This is not a party issue. This is a nonpartisan issue, and this should be addressed. It's disgraceful. And I really appreciate you being here today, because it's been 17 years we've been knocking our heads against the wall. We can't afford litigation. We can't. But you can do what happened in 1924. We didn't ask for it, but we got citizenship. We got the right to vote in 1962, 64. But what you can do with these HAVA funds is, first of all, you can complement the law in 1924. And then you make it just as historic by taking and offering equality at the ballot box throughout Indian country. And in closing, what I'd like to say is, I'm glad you came to Standing Rock to rock equality. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And I see your hat, your Navy hat. Thank you so much, sir, for your service. Mr. Davis.
Sir, thank you for your testimony. I appreciate your interest in HAVA and the Election Assistance Commission. That is under our committee's jurisdiction. You know, this is an opportunity for us to learn, to listen. You mentioned HAVA funds would be preferable to help establish more early voting sites. Are there, in Sioux County, for example, how many early voting sites are there? Because I'm just trying to compare to my home state.
0.
So 0 early voting locations?
Well, in Sioux County, Sioux County is the only county that has a reservation directly on it.
And there's not even at the courthouse, county courthouse?
That's what I was getting at. They do have in-person absentee voting. Now, there's a big difference there. And matter of fact, as an example, in 2018, we had a Native lady go there and ask to vote early because other counties had early voting. And they told her, no, you can't because we don't have early voting. So we asked her to ask for in-person absentee voting, and they said, sure, you can do it right now. Here, take it home. So we said, can she do it right here? And well, yeah. So there is in-person absentee voting, but there is not absentee or early voting.
early voting. Okay, so there's not a standard statewide.
What they did is they allowed the counties, and this is what's kind of confusing, not confusing, I guess it's upsetting, is that the states turn around and give the counties the authority to create early voting or not early voting. And what is disturbing is that these counties where Indian country is located is a protected class. And so by them saying it's a county's fault because they never asked, does not excuse the state under its responsibility as being the Secretary of State, being the chief election official, to require our request that those early voting be allowed for tribes.
Have you personally talked to the Secretary of State about your concerns?
I gave you, yes, back in October. Now, and then there's a 36-day law that South Dakota or North Dakota did that said you have to make this request prior to 36 days here and there. Well, when we got involved in this, the 36 days passed. But we did send him a letter asking for early voting. He basically said that it's not his responsibility, it's the county's.
What?
So on Sunday, I sent him another letter requesting the same thing and asking him if he was in compliance with the requirements of the Help American Vote Act. He replied that yes, he is, but the counties, again, are the ones responsible to establish these offices, which is not correct because he is the chief election officer. And so I don't feel under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is actually being complied with the HAVA funds being used in North Dakota.
Well, thank you. It's very interesting and something that we'll take back to our committee too. There's been a lot of discussion with previous panels about your local elected leaders not coming to the tribal areas to listen to the concerns. Have your voting officials, your Secretary of State, other officials, statewide officials, have they come to the tribal areas to sit down? Have you participated in any of those meetings?
I have a lot in South Dakota, but right now in North Dakota, the Secretary of State and me are just pen pals. So I have communicated our thoughts with them. We have talked to the tribes about, one of the things that I hope I can get clear is the state laws and how they write them. The tribes really don't have any knowledge of those laws. The tribal council and the tribal leaders aren't going to know that the most densely populated counties are given, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people more opportunity to vote than the tribes. And I always say that sometimes covert is more deadly than overt. That North Dakota law was an overt action, but we rallied, and you push Sue's around, we push back, and we bring our numbers in. But what happens with the Covert Act? The Covert Act, when you don't know that hundreds of thousands of people have a better opportunity to vote, how do you fight that? So yes, we have sent letters to the Secretary of State. We're hoping that he responds and says, you know what, we want to meet with the tribes. We want to establish these satellite offices. We know you're a protected class, and we want to put this here. So I hope that answers your question.
Sir, thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for your service to our nation. And thank you for your communication with your election officials. I know the Secretary of State, in a conversation I had with him yesterday, mentioned times he's come here to listen to the concerns of the tribal areas, and I encouraged him to continue to do that. I appreciate the opportunity to meet you, and thanks again.
Wokila.
Thank you very much. And I'm really glad that you mentioned about an energy that comes around when someone is trying to take something from you or do something to you. It's just like in our testimony, there was a 19-year-old woman who said that she had not been involved politically at all, but she realized that someone was trying to take something from her.
Yes, ma'am.
And it created the energy to get her to go and vote. So I'm glad that you talked about that. And as well, I want to say that I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I live in a county that has 1.5 million people. We have one early voting site.
My
One.
sister may have voted for you. She lives in Cleveland.
I hope so. We've got a pretty good-sized population, as a matter of fact, a Native American population in Ohio, in my area. But we have one early voting site for 1.5 million people. So it doesn't just happen here. It happens all over the country. I think here it happens more often, but we're going to Ohio next week to talk about the same kinds of things. I don't understand why it's difficult for people to understand that if you have 1.5 million people and you only have one early voting site, there's something wrong with that. So I agree with you. I think that we should look at how we can find the resources to put in place these satellites that you're talking about. And that really is what HAVA was established to do. So we're going to go back and take a look at that as well. I know that you didn't give all of your testimony, but if you'd like to just take a few minutes to tell me what it is you think that we can and should be doing, I'd appreciate hearing it from you.
Well, you know, I listened to the panels that testified before, and, you know, they were speaking from their heart, and they were speaking from Section 2 needs to be stay in place. Section 2 is basically what we utilize to ensure that HAVA is actually interpreted and the funds are distributed correctly. We use Section 2 in South Dakota, Section 2 in Montana, and Section 2 in Nevada. We're basically right now working with the Navajo Nation using Section 2 in a voting rights complaint. So it's very important. And, you know, here's how I explain things is if there are 5 ways to vote, don't give Native Americans 3 and say you can, we're even. If there's 5 ways to vote, every citizen should have that opportunity, whether it's in Cleveland, whether it's in the barrios. Every citizen should have those same exact rights. And the only way you're going to do it is by establishing these mirror satellite offices within the communities. The other thing I would also recommend is we need to take and have election officials work with communities to get more people of color to be election judges, election poll watchers. The voter suppression does not have to be a mile away and does not have to be a law. It could be 3 foot the length of the table when you're coming up to vote. And we have found that where we have had our natives as election officials, more people will come because they're not going to be embarrassed. They're not going to be turned away. And it's a friendly atmosphere. Our people are friendly people. And so it don't matter what color you are, when you come in, you are going to be treated with respect. And so that would be the take. And most importantly is, at least in Indian country, even directing $20 million, which is a drop in a bucket, in order to utilize to increase HAVA funds or at least identify HAVA funds to be used in states with large Native populations and work with the EAC so that they can get the message out, because it is in the HAVA law, but it's up to the interpretation of the Secretary of State that decides that, oh, no, this isn't really enhancing or bettering, voting rights. We're going to put it into buying machines. But if we can get EAC to issue, work with the House and issue a statement saying that this money can be utilized to help America Vote Act by establishing these type of in-person satellite offices, the only thing that's going to happen is the backbone of democracy is going to be given a brace because people are going to vote.
Well, I thank you first for, obviously, your patriotism, your service to this nation, but I also appreciate your passion for the service of your people. I think it is very, very important that you continue the fight. we're going to continue to fight with you because no matter the party, we all believe that everyone should have a right to vote. We just sometimes differ on how it should be done. But I thank you, and I thank all of the people who were witnesses here today. The testimony has been very valuable. We are going to be in touch once we put our report together. And so I'm going to thank you all again, and I want to thank, of course, Standing Rock Sioux Tribal Council for hosting us, the chairman and all of those who have been with us as well today. Again, our law enforcement, our staffs, and everyone who made this possible today. And this subcommittee now stands adjourned. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.